if you are here, I'm sure you don't have any hatred for my talks. So I would make a request. Please consider making a small contribution to a charity or a cause of your choice. You can do it yourself silently. If you inform me, I will be delighted. Okay. If you're in Delhi or if you're anywhere in the world, please make a contribution, if you consider it right, to the cause of the Indian farmers who are staging a really valiant fight at the Delhi border. Okay, this is a political statement. I don't want to give the statement, but I have no other option. So without any further ado, let me start my talk now. The life of Buddha is known even to a school child. I am not going to dwell on it. We all know that his messages and conversations laid the foundation of both Buddhistic religion and philosophy, which in the course of time spread all over Asia, to Ceylon, to Burma, to Thailand, to Cambodia, to Tibet, to China, to Japan and Korea, and to various other places. Like all great teachers of ancient times, Buddha taught through dialogues, and his teachings were also handed down orally for a long time. Our knowledge about Buddha's teachings depends today chiefly on the so-called Tripitakas, or the three baskets of teaching, which are claimed to contain his views as reported by his most intimate disciples. These three canonical works are named Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka and Abhidharma Pitaka. Of these, the first deals chiefly with rules of conduct for the Sangha, that is the congregation. The second contains Buddha's sermons and dialogues. And the third contains expositions of philosophical theories. All these three contain information regarding early Buddhist philosophy. These works are in the Pali dialect or language, whatever it is. Okay. As his followers increased in number, the inevitable splits happened, and Buddhists were divided into different schools. The most important division of Buddhism on religious principles was into Hinayana or Theravada and the Mahayana Buddhism. The first more or less flourished in the south, and as we know, his present stronghold is Ceylon and the Vietnam region and Burma. His literature is vast and is written in the Pali language. It is reputed to be more orthodox and faithful to the teachings of Buddha. Mahayana, on the other hand, flourished in the north and the central India and up to Nagarjuna until is a little further south. And today the adherents are to be found in Tibet, China and Japan. It adopted Sanskrit for philosophical discussion, and thus the enormous Buddhist literature in Sanskrit came to be developed. Most of this literature was translated into Tibetan and Chinese, and thus became naturalized in the lands in which Buddhism flourished. Many such valuable Sanskrit works lost in India are now being recovered from those translations. As Buddha flourished in different lands, its total output is humongous. My talk would cover only its important philosophers and teachers. Buddha himself, Nagarjuna, Dignaga, Buddhaghosa and Vasubandhu. Today, I am going to talk about Buddha's teachings and about the philosophy of Nagarjuna. Okay, with this preamble, now let us talk about Buddha. What Buddha does not do is that it doesn't go on a speculative expedition. It does not discuss about issues such as the eternality or the non-eternality of the world, the finiteness or the infiniteness of it, the nature of soul and its relationship with the human body, and several such things. He straightaway goes into the question of the human existence, his problems, and the cessation of his problems, and the path leading to his cessation. He comes out with 4 noble truths which form the basis of the Buddhist philosophy and religion. They are very simple in fact. Buddha says all existence is dukkha. The word dukkha has been variously translated as suffering, anguish, pain, struggle, unsatisfactoriness, and several other meanings are there. The Buddha's insight was that our lives are a struggle and we do not find ultimate happiness or satisfaction in anything we experience. This is the basic problem of human existence. His second noble truth was the cause of dukkha is craving, or you can call it desire. The natural human tendency is to blame our difficulties on things outside ourselves or persons other than ourselves. But the Buddha says that the actual root to be found in oneself, in the mind of oneself. In particular, our tendency to acquire things, to grasp at things, or alternatively to push things away. Okay. This tendency places us fundamentally at odds with the way life really is. So his third noble truth is the cessation of dukkha, that is, how dukkha will leave you, comes with the cessation of desire. Okay, if desire leaves you, dukkha will also leave you. As we are the ultimate cause of our difficulties, we are also the solution. We cannot change the things that happen to us, but we can change our responses. Yeah, the fourth important thing is Buddha says there is a path that leads you away from dukkha. Although Buddha throws responsibility back onto the individual, okay, he also taught methods through which we can change ourselves, okay, and this method is his Eightfold Path. See, the same thing is given so beautifully in Manimegalai. It says, Perandor urvadu perihiya tunbam. Perandor urvadu perihiya tunbam. Peravar urvadu perum per inbam. Peravar urvadu perum per inbam. Very, very easy. That is, if you are in the cycle of life, you will have to undergo dukkha. But if you are not born, you will be in the state of nirvana. That's what he says. How this birth comes? Patrin varuvadu munnadu. Okay, if you grasp something, if you desire something, that's why you are born again and again. Pinnadu atror urvadu ariha. Okay. If you leave all these things, you might achieve nirvana. Of course, it's easier said than done. Okay, if it is easy, then we would not be discussing those things here now. The Eightfold Paths are also simple. Buddha says, right views, right resolve, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right efforts, right mindfulness, and right concentration. He says it is in the hands of the individual. All these things you will do. If you lead an ethical life, okay, that will lead you to nibbana or nirvana. That's what Buddha says. Buddha is, very. I don't want to go into the. There are several things. What this Eightfold Paths imply. I don't want to go into that because that will be I don't have time for it anyway. Okay. Buddha is very clear. Buddha says, my teaching is not a dogma or a doctrine. But no doubt, some people will take it as such. He goes on to say that I must state clearly that my teaching is a method to experience reality and not reality itself. He gives an example. Just as a finger pointing at the moon is not the moon itself. A thinking person makes use of the finger to see the moon. A person who only looks at the finger and mistakes it for the moon will never see the real moon. This is what Buddha says. Though Buddha was rejecting ideas and values of the Brahminical religion, the Hindu religion, he did have at least one thing in common with some of them. He believed that salvation would come through knowledge. The cause of suffering is desire. Okay. But desire itself has a further cause, which is ignorance. Ignorance gives rise to karma, and karma to consciousness, which leads to sensation and therefore to desire. Desire in turn leads to rebirth. Once you are born, you are of course subject to the familiar travails of death, age, grief, and so on. I will repeat this. This is very, very important. Logically what he says is the cause of suffering is desire, but desire itself has a further cause, which is ignorance. Ignorance gives rise to karma, and karma to consciousness, which leads to sensation and therefore to desire. Desire in turn leads to rebirth, and once you are born, you are of course subject to the familiar travails or dangers of death, age, grief, and so on. The only way to get off this cycle is to try replacing your ignorance with understanding. You can avoid being attached to the things that falsely seem to benefit you now and in the future if you give up on the idea that you have a soul that can be benefited, you have a self that can be benefited. This is a basic pivotal point of Buddhism, which radically differs from other religions of India. What Buddha says is, if you give up the idea that you have a self or a soul that can be benefited, it is through embracing and acting in accordance with this theory of no self, that is anatta, or in Sanskrit anatman, that we reach nirvana or nibbana, which is liberation from all suffering. Okay, Buddha says there is no self, there is no Atma. If you think there is an Atma, that is the cause of the problem. Okay, because you are trying to do something to your Atma. Here, there may seem to be a contradiction within Buddha's teaching. We have been encouraged to give up on all desire. But what about desire for liberation? Could that too constitute a kind of longing or unsatisfied craving? In that case, the Buddha's teaching would just replace one sort of desire for another. That is, if you desire for Nibbana, that is also a desire. Okay. But if you reflect carefully, it cannot be, it need not be a self-defeating one. After all, the whole teaching is predicated on the desire to avoid suffering. When we learn that suffering comes from cravings and fears, our initial desire to avoid suffering should be transformed into a more useful desire. We should desire to lose all desire. This new desire is vital if you are to reach the goal, and more importantly, it may fall away once all other desires have been eliminated. See, Buddha comes out with a wonderful, example. It's one of the most, beautiful examples I have ever come across. Imagine, Buddha says, imagine that a man builds a raft to get across a river from a dangerous place to a place of safety. He has reached the place and he thinks to himself, this raft has been very, very useful to me. Suppose I were to hoist it on my head or load it on my shoulders and then go wherever I want. Okay, will it not be silly? Yeah, that would be silly. And the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching and the desire to attain Nirvana is similar to the raft. It is only for the purpose of crossing over, not something to hold on after you are on the other side. After explaining this, the Buddha tells the students, when you know the Dharma to be similar to a raft, you should abandon even the teachings. How much more so contrary to the teachings. Rafts are just the thing when you are trying to cross over. When the condition is no longer met, its value disappears. Indeed, the raft becomes an encumbrance. Likewise, the teachings of Buddha helps the students to cross over, to leave behind the world of desire and attachment and reach the state of enlightened life or nirvana. But when their purpose is finished, the simile seems to imply the Buddha's teaching are of no further use. Okay. Attachment in any shape or form is a cause of suffering, and that applies even to being attached to the truth. That is the truth given by Buddha. Now, let us analyze slightly, let us delve into this, the thing called anatma. There's one classical text on the issue that appears in Milinda Panna, which everyone knows, I think. I don't want to repeat that, which depicts a sage Nagasena in conversation with the Hellenistic king Menander, or Milinda. At one point of discussion, Nagasena tries to persuade the king that the familiar objects around us are considered to be whole substances only by convention. He gives an example of a chariot. He says, a chariot is nothing more to it than its parts. The axle, the yoke, the wheels, the reins, and so on. Yet, this does not mean that there's no sense in which we can truly say here is a chariot. Okay, it just means that the word chariot is a conventional one, a term we find convenient to apply to the whole aggregate of parts. Another nice example given the Buddhist literature is a fist, which is evidently nothing more than the hand and the fingers temporarily clenched together. Okay, once it is open, there is no fist. Okay, one can imagine, immediately, or Advaita in a critical immediately responding that every aggregate is made of constituents. Okay, these constituents may made up of still further constituents. Okay, but there should be an end. See, let us say my talk is made of sentences, which are in turn made of words, and in the end we must come to the fundamental parts like the syllables. Okay, so if you are looking for fundamental realities that make up a person, why not identify self as such a reality? Okay, that's what the opponents of Buddhists ask. Okay, there is a fundamental thing. Maybe self may be the fundamental thing. Why don't you accept it? The Buddhist has a rival answer to this question. They say that the term is in fact dharma to the components of any aggregate. There are 5 types of dharma that go to make up a person. To emphasize their mere aggregative nature, these are called khandas in Prakrita and skanda in Sanskrit, which means heaps. Okay. The heaps include all aspects of our being, our physical form, our bodily feelings and emotions. There's the 5 they are talking about, perception, thinking and consciousness itself. That list may look, vaguely familiar, since in the Upanishads these phenomena are the one that conceal the more fundamental soul hidden within. But for the Buddhists, there is nothing to a person over and above the conglomeration of momentary skandhas. What it says is, you are nothing more than your bodily states, your feelings and perceptions, all of which are present only momentarily, existing for a fleeting moment, only to be replaced by another skandhas of the same kind. It's like a film. Last time also I said it's like a film reel. It's like a film reel. Okay. So, what he says, what Buddha says, you are nothing other than your bodily states, your feelings, your perceptions, all of which are present only momentarily. This is very important. That's why I'm repeating it. Existing for only a fleeting moment, only to be replaced by another set of skandhas of the same kind. Okay. So not that it would be right to identify yourself with any of these skandhas individually or an aggregate. That would again represent attachment to the self. Okay, they say these are just the skandhas and that's it. Okay. So now, here we have arrived at the most famous or notorious philosophical doctrine of Buddhism, that we are nothing more than flowing streams with no firm identity from time to time. This idea will be defended very valiantly from time to time for the last, is being defended for the last almost 2000 years. Okay, Nagarjuna defended it, every other person they defended it. Okay, and the other theory, the Brahminical or the Hindu theory of unchanging self, soul is unchanging soul attacked again and again with great virtuosity by, for instance, by thinkers like Nagarjuna. But we already see it emerging from from the Pali literature, often in the context of discussing reincarnation. See, given this is a very there is a there's a glitch in this. If you reflect it carefully, given that the Buddhists rejected the conception of an enduring self, a soul, you might expect that they would simply have given up on the idea of a cycle of rebirth. What is being born is a question you can ask. If there is no self, what is being born again? But there is no chance of that. It was a core teaching of Buddha that actions have consequences, and the theory of karma is, of course, is Buddhist theory. It is a pan-Indian one. Every system has its theory of karma. This requires a commitment to rebirth, being born again and again, since the consequences evidently do not always materialize within the lifespan of one who performs the action. This is very, very clear. Every system say, Arathan Iruvana Venda, Sive Puruthan Uddanade. Even the ruler also says, karma is there everywhere. Okay. The key point is that the causal continuity replaces identity as a relationship that holds across lives and is sufficient to maintain fidelity to the ethic of karma. That is, though the individual will not be there, the individual, the person who born, who from one birth to another person is not the same soul, but there is a causal continuity. That's what Buddhist philosophy says. There is a causal. I will explain it later. In fact, Buddha compared the person going through the cycle of reincarnation to a dog tied to a stake, fruitlessly running around in circles. Even if you reflect, even the idea of caste membership is based on one's deeds in former lives. This can be found easily. This can be found in early Buddhist literature. So the caste is not the monopoly of the Hindu tradition. Okay. Yeah, but unlike the Advaita others or the Hindu philosophical systems, the Buddhists, with their no self doctrine, had an obvious difficulty. You yourself can see that in explaining the possibility of reincarnation. Okay, their solution seems to be paradoxical, or even it doesn't give an answer. You can say, reflecting on the widespread belief that we will be requited, we will be held responsible for our actions in the next life, they denied that he who experiences the fruit of the deed is the same as the one who performed the deed. That is, if I perform the deed, I should be the person who should reap the harvest of the deed in the next birth. But Buddhists said, no, you are not the person. That's what Buddhists say very, very clearly. But they also denied that these two, the two stand in no relationship whatsoever. This is what they say. This is a stand they take. Okay. You are not the same person, but one can't say that there is no relationship at all. See, if you can see this thinking slightly more carefully about the nature of this, the principle of aggregate, which is changing over time, things might become slightly clear. Let me give an example of an elephant. Okay. Every day it loses weight, okay, by dropping humongous amounts of dung and takes in matter thanks to this digestive cycle. So if you are very strict about it, we might say that it is not exactly the same elephant from day to day. Today, it consists of different parts than the one that made it up yesterday. On the one hand, it seems equally obvious that today's elephant is not completely different from yesterday's. It retains some part that it had before, which is why we can truthfully say that this elephant, which is merrily chomping through the sugarcane field now, is the same as the one that was tearing away a tree last night. And remember, Buddhists are out to reject the Brahmanical idea that soul is the same across the time, an unchanging foundation of identity which endures through changes in our perceptions and even from one life cycle to the next. If a person is nothing but an aggregate of changing skandhas, then it obviously failed to have the sameness across time. Still, it might be the same in some weaker sense. For example, because the stream of skandhas is causally interconnected in some way. Okay, this is what the Buddhists they try to explain. This is not a very very satisfactory explanation, but this is an explanation given by the Buddhists. They again and again they say that you are not the same person, but the aggregates, they shift there's a causal continuity from one aggregate to the other aggregate. So the fruit of your labor reaches the other aggregate. This is a Buddhist theory of karma. Okay. The Buddhist philosophy itself was a changing agglomeration, I could say, with different thinkers, holding rival views at one time and across the centuries. So it was when it came to the question we have raised: what if any weaker sense of persistence might take a person from one incarnation to another? Okay. A minimal view suggested by Nagasena's discussion on the chariot would be that talking about one person as being the same across time would be merely a useful convention. Okay, that's what it says. The person, as we understand, is not there in Buddhism. The person, there's no person. Okay, that's what is only a convention. That's what Buddhist theory says. But at the other end of the spectrum, the later day say, some Buddhists endorse the idea of an underlying subject that emerges from the skandhas and that can undergo rebirth. Okay, they say there's a subject which does undergo rebirth. They are called Pudgala, the Pudgalavada. Other Buddhists unsurprisingly felt that this would be tantamount to conceding the Brahmanical view of soul. Okay, there are similar tensions in early Buddhist literature about how exactly our actions determine our fate in the next life. Sometimes Buddha is quoted as marking the Jain idea that actions cause karma to adhere to us from one life to another. At other times, we find him insisting, like the Ajivakas, like this, like the Ajivakas, that the right course is to avoid action entirely, precisely because it brings karma. Perhaps the inevitability of such tensions explains why once, when Buddha was asked whether there is really a soul or a self, he simply refused to answer. This strategy, you should know, was a favorite of Buddha's. Okay, he has remained silent many times. But we should remember, Buddha also gives a warning. It's a very important warning. Buddha says, he says, if you learn, he accuses some people. They learn the Dharma only for the sake of criticizing others and for winning in debates. And they do not experience the good for the sake of which they learned the Dharma. These teachings, being wrongly grasped by them, would cause them harm and suffering for a long time. Why is that? Because of the wrong grasp of these teachings. Buddha says, suppose a man eating a snake, sneaking a snake, wandering in search of a snake, saw a large snake and grasped its tail. It would turn back on him and bite his hand or arm or one of his limbs. And because of that, he would come to death or deadly suffering. Why is that? Buddha asked. Because of his wrong grasp of the snake. So Buddha is very clearly warning you. You should know, your dharma is not very easily attained. You should be very, very careful in understanding, approaching dharma. That's what Buddha says. Yeah, now let me come to the other great philosopher, Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna lived in the 2nd century CE at a critical time for the development of both Buddhism and Jainism. It was in this period that thinkers of both traditions began writing in Sanskrit, having previously stuck with Pali in the case of Buddhism and Prakrit in the case of the Jainas. This allowed the Shramana movements to meet their Vedic opponents on their own linguistic ground, even as the Buddhists and Jainas also engaged in debate with one another. In fact, Mahayana Buddhism propounded by Nagarjuna had in fact emerged well before the time of even before Nagarjuna. Sometime around last century, the 1 century before Christ or the 1st century CE. Its self-side superiority to other Buddhist groups turned on his claim to be pursuing a higher ethical goal. See, the Mahayana Buddhism, why they consider themselves so superior is that where others might be content to become enlightened and so achieve the status of a arhat. That is, everything is individual, The Mahayanas emphasized the more exalted role of the Bodhisattva. Indeed, their school was earlier called, in fact, Bodhisattvayana, if I am not mistaken. A Bodhisattva, according to them, is more than an Arhat or even a Buddha, because he goes beyond perfect liberation and wisdom by seeking to bring others to this same state. So thus the Mahayanas put other regarding ethics at the center of their conception of Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism care about the community. It doesn't it doesn't think of individual. It doesn't think of individuals. They recognize the great sacrifice and patience. They recognize that great sacrifice and patience will be required to reach the level of a Bodhisattva. They speak of needing millions of world cycles in order to achieve this. Mahayana is also distinct from other Buddhist schools in terms of the text is recognized as authoritative. This happens in the 6 schools of Indian philosophy also. The text, the authority, keeps on, adding up. It consists a number of new sutra texts to be genuine records of things said by Buddha, despite having become available only centuries after his death. These had been hidden in the meantime or were posthumously divulged by Buddha in dreams. This is what they claim. More generally, Mahayana tends to think of Buddha less of an individual person and more as a functional role. This is very important. They tell us that the Buddha teaches at all times and adopts many roles or guides us to do so. And assert, in fact, this is a very important assertion, and assert that there have been more than one Buddha, indeed as many as the grains of sand in the Ganges. This is what they say. So Buddhist history, thus, Buddhist history is not a single flowing river. It is a set of many branching tributaries like Hinduism. In fact, Mahayana Buddhism itself is divided into two main sub-schools. We know that we are coming to the other school in my next lecture anyway. Okay, the most famous of it now is the Madhyamika, the philosophy of the middle way, founded by Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna's philosophy was destined to go on to great things in Tibet, China and Japan, and is in fact the ultimate source of Zen Buddhism. Okay. Why does Nagarjuna call his brand of Buddhism Madhyamika, that is middle way? Because it neither embraces the permanence of things nor does it deny that anything is real. In fact, now we should come to the doctrine of Sunyavada. The doctrine of Sunyavada is usually understood by non-Buddhist philosophers to mean that the universe is totally devoid of reality, that everything is a void, everything is a sunya. Okay. In fact, in his Sarvadarsana Sangraha, Madhavacharya has mentioned the following as an argument in his support. This is what I am going to read what Madhavacharya says. He says the self or the knower, the object or the known, and the knowledge are mutually interdependent. The reality of one depends on each of the other two. And if one be false, the other must be so. That is, the example given is, if the fatherhood of any person will be proved false, if the existence of his children, be proved to be false. Okay. If there is no children, there is no father. That's what that is the logic given by him. But it must be admitted that he takes the famous example of snake and rope. When it is admitted that what we perceive as a snake in a rope, okay, is false. That is, when we perceive a snake in a rope, the object perceived, namely the snake, is absolutely false. Okay, if this is an object, okay. Hence, the mind or the subject which knows such an object turns out to be false, and its knowledge also becomes false. Thus, it may be concluded that all that we perceive within or without, along with their perception and the percipient mind, are illusory like dream objects. There is therefore nothing mental or non-mental which is real. The universe is shunya or void of reality. This is what a non-Hindu way of looking at, non-Buddhist way of looking at the Sunyavada. So according to them, the Madhyamika view says everything is unreal. That is why this such a view is came to be known as nihilism in the West. In fact, the word Sunyavada itself is chiefly responsible for this notion, because Sunya means ordinary, zero or void or empty. But if you look at the philosophy more closely, we come to realize that the Madhyamika view is certainly not nihilism as ordinarily supposed, and that it does not deny all reality, but only the apparent phenomenal world perceived by us. Behind the phenomenal world, there is a reality which is not described by any character, mental or non-mental, that we perceive. Okay. Being devoid of phenomenal character, it is called Shunya. Okay. You see the comparison between Brahman and the Shunya, that will always be there, okay. So, but this is a negative aspect of the ultimate reality. It is only a description of what it is not. Okay. In the Lankavada Sutra, it is stated that the real nature of objects cannot be ascertained by the intellect and cannot therefore be described. That which is real must be independent and should not depend on anything else for its existence or origination. But everything we know of is dependent on some condition. Hence it cannot be real. Again, it cannot be said to be unreal. Because an unreal thing like a castle in the air can never come to existence. To say that it is both real and unreal, or that is neither real or nor real, would be just jargon, unintelligible jargon. So, Shunyata or voidness is a name for this indeterminable, indescribable real nature of things. Things appear to exist, but if you try to understand the real nature of their existence, our intellect is baffled. It cannot be called either real or unreal, or both real and unreal, or neither real nor unreal. See, in these arguments, the indescribable nature of things is deduced from the fact of their being dependent on other things or conditions. Nagarjuna says the fact of dependent origination, that is praditya samutpada, is called by us Shunyata. There is no dharma, character of this thing, which is not dependent on some other condition regarding its origin. Therefore, there is no dharma which is not Shunya. It would appear, therefore, that Shunya only means the conditional character of things and their consequent constant changeability and indeterminability and indescribability. Okay, is it clear? See, what he says is, again I will repeat, Shunya means what is the reality which cannot be perceived by us. That's what it says. But as far as the phenomenal world is concerned, it is not real because it's continuously changing. Simple, that's what it says. Okay. Today's world is not tomorrow. This moment's world is not the next world. It is changing. You can't define. It's not real. Okay. This all heaps, various things. The heaps keep on changing. Okay. But that doesn't mean that there's no reality. There is a reality, that's what he says. That you attain once you get the nirvana, when you reach that stage, there's a final void, that is real. That's what this theory says. This view is called the Madhyama path, the middle path, because it avoids extreme views by denying, for example, both absolute reality and absolute unreality of things and asserting their conditional existence. This was the reason why Buddha calls the theory of dependent origination the middle path. Now, praditya samutpada, that's what Buddha's word is. So, Nagarjuna says that Shunyavada is also called the middle path because it implies the theory of dependent origination. Okay. The condition of things which makes their own nature, that is swabhava, unascertainable, either as real or unreal, etc. Maybe we could regard them as a kind of relativity. Each character of a thing is conditioned by something else. Therefore, its existence is relative to that condition. So, Shunyavada can therefore also be interpreted as a sort of a theory of, relativity, which declares that no thing, no phenomenon experienced has a fixed, absolute, independent character of its own, swabhava, and therefore no description of any phenomenon can be said to be unconditionally true. Okay, to this philosophy of phenomena or things as they appear to us, the Madhyamikas add a philosophy of reality in itself. Buddha's teachings regarding on the dependent origination, impermanence, etc., apply only to the phenomenal world. It's very important. Whatever he says is only applied to phenomenal world, to things commonly observed by us in ordinary experience. But when nirvana is attained, the condition of sense experience and the appearance of phenomena are controlled. What would be the nature of resultant experience when we reach that stage? To this stage, we cannot apply the conditional characters to of a phenomena. The Madhyamikas therefore hold that there is a transcendental reality behind the phenomenal reality, and it is free from change, conditionality in all other phenomenal characters. That is, there is a permanent reality, there is a reality which is unchangeable, which doesn't, which doesn't have the characteristics of ordinary matters. This Nagarjuna says there are two truths on which Buddha's teaching of Dharma depends. One is empirical, that is Samvritti Satya, meant for ordinary mortals like us, for the ordinary people. The another is the transcendental or the absolute truth, which is the Paramartha Satya. Okay. Those who do not know the distinction between these two kinds of truth cannot understand the profound mystery of Buddha's teaching. Okay. The truth of the order is only a stepping stone to the attainment of the higher order. No. The nature of nirvana experience, which takes one beyond ordinary experience, cannot be described. I am repeating again, it cannot be described. It can only be suggested negatively with the help of words which describe our common experience. This is like the neti thing, in Upanishads, whether it is Brahman is this or that or that. That's why Nagarjuna uses the same tactics. Nagarjuna therefore describes nirvana with a series of negatives. That which is not known, not acquired anew, not destroyed, not eternal, not suppressed, not generated, is called nirvana. As with nirvana, so also with the Tathagata, or one who has realized nirvana. Nagarjuna says his nature also cannot be described. That is why when Buddha was asked what becomes of the Tathagata after nirvana is attained, he declined to answer that question. See, there's a very interesting thing, In Milindapana, the king Menander points to an apparent contradiction in reports about Buddha. Okay. So on the one hand, it is said that he kept nothing hidden, unlike the other teachers who kept things hidden in their fists. On the other hand, Buddha was in the habit of refusing to answer questions. So which is it? Did he teach the truth openly or not? Nagasena responds, there are four sorts of questions, Some call the question, what Nagarjuna is very, very interesting. He says, some call for a straightforward answer, some for further clarification, others should elicit a question in reply, and some should just be met with silence. I think this makes, if you reflect, this makes sense. This reply is a wonderful reply, this makes sense. Let us say, if someone asks you whether MGR's tail is longer than Karunanidhi's, you couldn't reasonably be expected to give a straightforward, simple answer. That might be a situation when you should instead respond with another question such as, what makes you think that they have tails? Okay. But will it be right to refuse to respond at all? Nagasena says, there is no utterance or speech of the Buddha that is without reason or without cause. This suggests that it is up to Buddha's interlocutor, in fact, the person who asked the question, to deserve an answer, or to be in a position where some answer or other would be productive. If he is confronted by someone who only wants to win debates or boast of his enlightenment, then Buddha will confront him with stony silence rather than pearls of wisdom. The silence of Buddha regarding all metaphysical questions about non-empirical things can be interpreted to mean that he believed in a transcendental experience in reality, the truth about which cannot be described in terms of common experience. Buddha's frequent statements that he had realized some profound truth which reasoning cannot grasp can also be cited to support this Madhyamaka contention about the transcendental. Okay, I have almost covered what Nagarjuna's theory is. In fact, when you reflect in his conception of the twofold truth, his denial of the phenomenal world, his negative description of the transcendental truth, and his conception of nirvana as the attainment of unity with the transcendental reality. That's what it says. The Madhyamaka anticipates, in fact, it resembles, in fact, Advaita Vedanta, elaborated later by Gaudapada and Shankaracharya. This is why opponents of Advaita call Shankara Prasanna Avatar, Buddha in disguise. If you ask me, I would consider it a compliment. Thank you very much.